The other very interesting and important instrument in terms of Latin American music that came from Spain is the harp. And the harp has virtually disappeared in Spain and in Portugal as a folk or popular instrument, but it was once very important, and it came into Spain from the Arab cultures. Where does the harp come from? What is a harp? Well, there are two kinds of harp, actually. One in which the lower part of the body is the resonating chamber, and then a large arc that goes over the top, and the strings go between it. And so the resonating chamber, the amplifying chamber, is on the bottom. There's another type in which the resonating chamber is on the top, and there's just a bar on the bottom to attach the strings. That type with the resonating chamber on top is found in ancient Persia, in the Ottoman Empire. It's found in Central Asia, then in ancient China, and from there it was used in the Tang orchestras, the Tang Dynasty orchestras, and as part of that cultural influence went on even to Korea and Japan, where it was also played in the courts. But it disappeared everywhere in Asia, including Persia and in Turkey. It's no longer used at all, although there are some recent reconstructions of it in Turkey. The only place it survives in Asia is in Burma. The one harp survives in Asia is the Burmese harp, which probably came over from ancient India and was kept alive there. In Spain, of course, the harp, when it was originally used, was used to play Arabic music, and we have no idea how it was played, how that might have sounded. Later, this was taken up by Jewish and Christian Spaniards, and they played the harp, and they continued to use it both as a popular music and as an instrument in the court. There is one surviving tradition of harp played amongst the Arab peoples, and that's the one low place is found in Mauritania. It's a desert country on the western part of Africa between Senegal and Morocco, and they still use an instrument called the ardin. We don't know what the sound of the old Spanish harp was. We have no idea how the Spanish played it. There are some examples of it written in notation, and they tell us something about it. There's an old seguidillas, which is, of course, seguidillas now is a flamenco form, but it was an old Spanish dance long before the development of gypsy flamenco. And there's an example of a reconstructed version of that, an old seguidillas from the 15th century, and this is what that sounds like. The harp continues to be used in Spain in a way that we find it's very different from what we think of. Apparently, the harp and the organ and eventually the keyboard, the harpsichord, were considered almost interchangeable. Eventually, there were also instruments, harps, that played chromatic music, so they could change key when they had to, or add chromatic notes in the middle of playing. Those no longer exist, except for the Western modern chromatic harp that's used for concert music. But there are some old examples of late 18th century music that suggest what Spanish American music or Spanish music might have sounded like at the time it was first introduced into the Americas. Here's an 18th century composer, Mateo Albéniz, wrote a short sonata for the harp, and this sounds reflective of what the other kind of harp music we hear in Latin America. The harp in Latin America seems to have been first brought by the Spanish priests, who used that along with the fiddle and the guitar to teach the Indians. They created schools for the indigenous peoples, and they taught them to play music, and of course they taught them the music that they knew in Spain. The indigenous people took up this music and continued it in a number of places, amongst the Yaqui and Sonora, amongst the Quiche and other Indians, of the Mayan type Indians in Guatemala and in Chiapas, Mexico. They continued this tradition. So this is one tradition, the old form of the harp played by indigenous peoples, like the Huasteca of San Luis Potosí and Veracruz. But then the local people, the Spanish people and the people of mixed heritage, mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage, the mestizos, they began to take up harp and guitar and play their own music. And a long period of time while these regions were separated from each other, remember people didn't travel very much, these developed in individual styles. So in Mexico you have at least two distinct harp styles surviving today, the one from the coastal region of Veracruz and the other one from Michoacan. But in South America, there's a harp tradition that was very strong. There were actually a number of them, and many of them have disappeared. There was also another kind of music developed later, about the same time that the six-string guitar is developing in the New World, or brought over from Spain to the New World. There's a new kind of harp music developing, and this is a kind of salon music. It's something that when people would get together, somebody would be asked to play an instrument, and later on it became the piano, but in those days it was more than likely the harp, or perhaps a guitar. Somebody would play a piece on the guitar. It was considered a polite refinement to know how to play the harp, and young ladies were encouraged to play the harp and to show how graceful and well educated they were as a prelude to marriage. So we have first the indigenous music played by the Indians who were taught, the indigenous peoples who were taught by the Jesuit priests, and they took that up and continued it. Then we had the regional harp styles, for example, as exemplified by the harp playing in Venezuela and Colombia and in Paraguay, and the different harp styles of Mexico. And then we have, it's also the Andean region where the harp is played, but we're going to talk about that separately because it's rather unique. Here's some examples of the different regional styles of mestizo style of music that is the professional harp playing. There are two different styles from Venezuela. First, the northern style of northern Venezuela from the provinces of Aragua and Miranda. They use the harp to accompany improvised poetry, sometimes competitions, So it's just the harp, and the singer is playing the maracas just to keep the rhythm.
Ya mi madre falleció, que para una eternidad, como no he de llorar yo, que ya es ver mi fatalidad, que cuando ella me veía, que confuso y con atención, yo me puse en confusión que dice esta noche y día, si fallece madre mía, que en qué carta quedo yo. Cuando estoy dentro, o ahí dentro que hay un tan fuerte parasismo, que entonces dije yo mismo que ya mi madre falleció. Cuando ella me dijo a mí que ya está aquí tuviste madre, fueron a buscarle el padre que trajeron un...
There's another style of harp playing in Venezuela which comes from the plains region in the center, and that uses the harp and the maracas and one person playing the cuatro, which just provides the harmony. In the coastal region of Veracruz, the harp is very important. There's a number of pieces that are played using the harp and accompanied by the requinto and jarana, just different kinds of guitar.
Hasta que amanezca. ¡Opa! Voy a tirar blanco. Síguela.
In Chile and Argentina, the harp seems to have disappeared, but we know that it did exist for a long time, and young ladies often played the harp for salon music, but harp was also used for dance music. We have only a couple of old recordings left of ladies who still played the kind of polite salon music, and here's a recording of a cueca from Chile, made many, many years ago, so it's an old field recording.
La cordillera me sí, la cordillera sí. La Virgen y la Madre están llorando, sí señora. La Virgen y la Madre están llorando, sí señora. La vida y la fundición de acero, sí, sí, sí. La Virgen tengo mi amor trabajando, sí señora. La Virgen en la cordillera llueve, sí señora. En la puerta de mi casa versión flores, sí, sí, sí. Para aquí se diviertan los fundidores, sí señora. En la puerta de mi casa.
There was also in Mexico, in many regions of Mexico, where a popular culture was developing, a middle class was developing. They also took up the harp, and they would play salon pieces, not the kind of vigorous dance music played by the folk and professional musicians of Veracruz and Michoacan, but a different kind of lighter, more polite music. Oddly enough, because the Philippines was part of the Spanish Empire, but it was so far from Spain that it was administered through Mexico, and the ships bringing Chinese ceramics and silks coming from the east would often come from the Philippines to Mexico, and from there the things would be transported on into Europe. But with that came a number of elements of Mexican Spanish culture that were introduced into the Philippines. So it is amazing that in the Philippines there still survives a harp tradition in a few regions, in the central Visayas region and in the northern Ilocos region, where the harp is still played, and they still play these polite salon pieces, and very often they were played by young ladies showing their good education. The last of the harps I want to talk about is the Andean harp. It was used in Peru and the other Andean regions. Again, it was brought by European Spanish priests who taught the Indians to play it. What is unique about the harp in Peru is that unlike all the other harps that we've been talking about, from the Philippines to Mexico to Venezuela, even in Paraguay, the harp in the Andean region does not play in the Spanish harp technique. Instead of using the left hand to play the low notes and play an arpeggiated harmonic part and the upper parts to play melody, either melody or in harmony, the Andean harp imitates the sound of Andean flutes and drums. So the high strings play tremolo like the charango played, strumming up and down rapidly to make a tremolo sound, like a trill. And the lower strings are used to imitate the sound of the Andean drums. So it's like a flute and drum band, but now playing in harmony and melody. It is I know it's deceptive when you first see a Peruvian harpist who turns his harp upside down and plays it walking down the street upside down. Actually, that has nothing to do with it. Turning the harp upside down, still the left hand plays the low notes just as it would the other way, and the right hand plays the high notes just as it would the other way. But it just makes it seem like everything is upside down. In fact, the music itself is upside down, whether they play the harp right side up or not. But it is a very interesting and unique style of playing. To summarize the harps in the New World, there was the indigenous use of the harp, which we found amongst the indigenous peoples of Chiapas, the Yaqui, and the Huasteca region, the Yaqui in northern Mexico. And then, of course, the indigenous people playing their own unique style in the Andean region. The mestizo criollo style of playing, that is the more Spanish influence but regionally isolated and locally developed styles, or there were in Venezuela and Colombia the plain style, and then the northern Venezuelan style, different in Aragua and Miranda, and then the harp playing in Paraguay, the harp playing in Chile and Argentina, which has pretty much disappeared. Harp playing in Mexico, two different forms in Michoacan and Veracruz.